Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub on this Wednesday afternoon. Vlad and I today are going to talk about some change management. We're also doing some trading places sort of thing. I'm in Canada this week. Vlad is in the States this week. I don't think we could have planned it better if we tried. But if you guys are new to Manufacturing Hub, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, most weeks Vlad and I have conversations with other practitioners, and we pick different topics and we have conversations about that, topical within manufacturing and automation. This month, we picked honestly, a really difficult topic to go talk about, change management, a topic that Vlad and I, if you've listened to the earlier ones, have certainly talked about a bunch in previous episodes, but is also a difficult conversation of how do we put together four coherent conversations from different perspectives and try to keep everyone interested. And we do want to keep you guys interested. So if you guys are watching, please feel free to go drop questions in the comments for Vlad or myself. If you guys have questions about change management, if there are things going on in your careers that you want to discuss, as Vlad and I will go share some examples as we get a little bit deeper into this. We're I'm not sure we're happy, but we're certainly willing to. I've got a couple of failures in here, at least one failure that I certainly want to talk about, as I feel like we learned the most from failure. But before we get there, and without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 262. My name is Dave Griffith. This guy over here is Vlad Romanov. Vlad, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I think we do have some interesting announcements. I've certainly made a post about a trade show that we will be at in just a couple of weeks. So I guess we can start by unpacking that before we get into the actual topic of change management. I could probably get us started, Dave, if you will.
Please.
So we do have a few things that we are officially committed to. Obviously, on both sides, still open to having certain conversations. So if any of our listeners are interested in hanging out, having a conversation during Automate, feel free to reach out to myself and or Dave. That being said, we have a few commitments, like I've mentioned. So the first one being Siemens. So we will be there on Tuesday afternoon in the booth 1214. And we're planning to have, again, in a similar format that we've had the previous years, multiple conversations with different experts, different practitioners, but also managers and strategists in our space, trying to, number one, cover some of the interesting hardware and software releases, but also try to understand the overall strategy of where not only Siemens is going, but ultimately where the industry is going and what plans Siemens has for some of those transitions. We will also be at the Horner Automation booth. We plan to be there on Wednesday morning, and that's going to be booth number 4303. And once again, similar style of conversations, but of course, different manufacturer in a slightly different vertical and space. As Dave have mentioned, we will be having a conversation with Chuck next week, which should be really interesting as well. A little bit off camera, we've talked about some of the industries that they serve, and that is certainly not where I've typically seen PLCs. They do a lot of building management, but also some niche applications like ambulances, for example, right, where their PLCs have very interestingly shined. So I'm really curious to learn not only next week, but also to see it in person at Automate. On my side, I will also be at the Tigoor booth. I have received official confirmation that the hardware has arrived to my headquarters. And I released, I would say, a teaser of what's to come at Automate, but basically it's going to be a build utilizing a couple of platforms that we see in our space, including Ignition, Rockwell, Portainer, and the hardware from Tigoor, right? That's going to be hosting a lot of that software and then presenting some of the key screens as you would normally. Again, the intent is obviously to showcase something that you would see in a normal facility, but of course, a lot of the code is simulating different processes. So if you do have some time and interest, pass by the Tigoor booth. That's going to be 32022. I will have a space there with a demo. I will also be giving out some of these rulers that I have fabricated using a PCB manufacturing process from China, but ultimately they have some really cool Not only general IT tips, not only PCB design tips, but also really cool jokes and teasers from industrial automation and manufacturing. So come by during Automate. We will definitely give you one of those. Dave, what are you going to be doing at Automate outside of
Well,
manufacturing?
First and foremost, I am very excited for the rulers. It was really awesome watching you go through the process of building it. And I'm going to go bring like my binoculars to see if I can read all of the tiny different things. As listeners, as I told Vlad, this is what I imagine his like engineering cheat sheets would look like, as he's got a I don't even know if the human eye can read that, Vlad. There's just so much on there, but I do love it, absolutely so much. So me on my side on Wednesday, I am moderating a session called Software Defined Automation and Feature Factory. It is in one of the rooms, so I think you guys have to have a session pass for that. On Wednesday, we are room S401 Delta. I believe I'm going to have access to the video of it. And if we get approval and it's a good session, we'll probably go ahead and run it here so you guys can take a listen to it as well. Beyond that, I've got some booth duty with 4IR, the group that you guys have seen on here several times, and a group that I work with in the Ignition Ecosystem booth, which is booth 1678. I'll be there Monday and at various times throughout the rest of the week. And then beyond that, if you guys are at Automate and you guys are an Ignition user or systems integrator, come find me. I want to talk about some of the tools that we're building. One of them is called Elephant, and it's in our Ignition logs and diagnostic bundle analysis tool. So come find me. We'll go ahead and show you what we are building when it comes to that. Vlad, I feel like every year you and I have some sort of synopsis Wednesday night or Thursday night of Automate, and we're like, we've done too much. We've committed to too many things. Actually, that's at the end of every single trade show. And good news, listeners, we have obviously not learned any of our lessons, and we are doubling down this year. We are absolutely doubling down this year. Couple of exciting things, as Vlad had previously mentioned, coming up in the next couple of weeks. So next week, we've got Chuck Ridgway from Horner Automation on. We're going to talk about Horner. We're going to talk a little bit about Automate. We're going to talk about some other things. Previously, we had him on episode 128. That was actually a really fun episode. So they do all-in-one, panel PCs, panel all-in-ones. And we talked about an application in which they were using those to retrofit baseball fields. And I thought that is one of those that really stuck with me. Every once in a while, we just get a couple of applications that are just so out of the norm of my life that they stick with you. And that was absolutely one that will continue to stick with me. And then June 10th, we have Chris Stevens and Anne-Marie Brew from Siemens on. Previously, we had them on last year at Automate episode 216. Going to have them on for the full episode. It's my understanding that they are both keynoting Automate again this year. So we'll probably get a little bit of an understanding of what the keynote's going to be, what they're talking about. I imagine we're going to see a lot of AI at Automate. Vlad, we didn't have this on our guesstimations, but do you have some guesstimations of things that you think we're going to see a lot of at Automate?
Well, again, I think reflecting from Hanover Messe that I went to recently, everyone's going to have a different flavor of AI. I think it is at this point expected. I believe that it's no longer sufficient to say that we have AI or we have enabled AI. There needs to be a interesting either angle or approach, right? So when it comes to Siemens, and I think I've told you this a little bit off stream, they have launched not the same version of AI Copilot that they had for Sematic AX, but now it is open to TIA Portal. I have not played with it myself, but I'm assuming that at least on the control system side, there will be a pretty significant emphasis on that side. As far as, again, I know that the teams that we're going to be talking to oversee a variety of different solutions on hardware and software. If there's going to be AI in, like digital twin, even in products like VFDs, I don't know. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like for sure, but it's hard for me to make those predictions.
Absolutely. I think we'll see. I agree with you. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about AI. Some of the conversations that I have had with the vendors are very similar to the conversations that you and I have had, Vlad, right? In the effect of end users no longer are past the point in which AI is going to wow them. It's going to be, how are you using AI to solve a solution, a problem? What is the problem you're solving? How is this solution better and faster, and at the end of the day, less expensive for me? Leveraging some of these AI tools, and so I think it'll be interesting. I think it will even be a shift from Prove It that was just 2 or 3 months ago, of kind of the continuation of these have to go solve problems. We need to see what problems these are going to solve. I think chatbots will be even less appealing and exciting at Automate than they were at Hanover, than they were at Prove It, than they were last year, right? Because that is very kind of baseline. That is baseline entry. I'm also excited to go see some of the physical AI. So several weeks ago, we talked about physical AI with the folks at Vention. Thought they had some really interesting takes and topics when it came from that. And so I think we'll probably see the robots and cobots moving towards physical AI. I am also interested to go hear the take on cobots, right? I forget what the IEC regulations ruling structure that came down towards the end of last year, basically eliminating the self-categorized cobot category. And so it'll be interesting to see if there is a shift towards, if there's a shift in what that looks like, both AI and what the cobot versus robot side of everything looks. And I expect to see groups generally go big and continue to go big, right? There's a lot of room. Most of the groups that I have talked with that had medium to large size booths last year at Automate are going to have medium to larger size booths again this year at Automate. And it will be it's an interesting time frame, right? So typically we're on the back end of Automate now already. It's going to be at the end of June. So I imagine that there will be some people who would typically go to Automate that have other commitments or vacation or travel scheduled that are not going to be at Automate from the non-exhibitor side. But I also imagine it'll give us the opportunity to go capture other people from the community, from the Chicagoland area, from kind of generally everywhere, who maybe early to middle May wasn't good for them, but the end of June was good for them. And so with that, I am excited to see that. Throw out to the listeners, as Vlad said, are you guys planning to attend Automate this year? Would love to know if you are, and if you are, what those plans look like. Vlad, I want to go ahead and jump into the topic that we promised the listeners we were going to cover. I want to talk about change management. What does change? I get to go ask the question that you get to go ask all of our guests, Vlad. And as I was looking at this, I'm like, what appropriate turn of the tables, if you will. So, Vlad, what does change management mean to you? What does it look like? And like maybe what does it look like currently? Because we're going to do some retrospection and reflection of what change management has looked like in various parts of our career. So for you, Vlad, what is change management and what does it currently look like in your career?
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to, I would say, come up, but also to articulate a concise definition of change management, and specifically as it relates to maybe industrial automation and manufacturing. So I guess let me maybe take a step back, right? So when it comes to a general concept of running a business that is not manufacturing specific, right? Just any business in general, there is always a pressure to change, ultimately improve in a general sense, because nothing is stagnant in our world, right? So there's going to be new competitors, there's going to be political changes, there's going to be factors that are external to the business that make it so that change, if I were to create a bumper sticker maybe, is change is inevitable, right? And so because of that reason, in the industrial space as well as manufacturing, you have different teams that will constantly tweak, so to speak, the process that is currently in place. And that could be something as simple as I don't know, maybe repainting the walkways or implementing a 5S system, right? So using some of the Lean Six Sigma tools. It could also be digital transformation at its, I would say, most basic sense, where instead of sending messages by copying or printing them out and giving them to the person, now we're writing an email, right? So this is something that probably changed a couple of decades ago. Now, all of those changes are going to touch different departments. So from the simplest change, it may impact a single person, to maybe a small team of people, to the largest changes that we've discussed again on Manufacturing Hub could be a new ERP system rollout, right? And so again, just to be very concrete with some of these examples for listeners that may not understand, it could be a very benign change, again, going paperless for your communications. It could be going paperless, or I guess whiteboardless, for some of your recordings at the end of the line as to how many packages we have made. Just like it could be revamping the entire business, with a lot of that impacting the plant floor. And so for me, ultimately, change management is basically understanding risk that there is for the business, but also for the different stakeholders, and implementing a process that allows us to mitigate some of that risk. And of course, we can have a discussion whether that's retroactively, if it's reactively, or if it's going to be during the process, and what tools does it take. But ultimately, it is, for me, basically understanding and reacting to risk.
Okay. I I like that. I think that that's a very good definition. When I think of change management, I look at it in kind of the more macro sense of it is the process that one must go through in order to get the agreement and in order to go physically change the processes, right? And
Mhm.
that is consistent of everything from, hey, we are introducing Lean Six Sigma, and this is the 5S process, right? And so we're going to go through and we're going to go teach, and then we're going to go through the 5S process. And as we go through the 5X process, we've got to do X, Y, and Z things, and we've got to go get green belts, and we've got to go do all of these things, right? So, like, change management is how we go do that and acquire the agreement from everyone as we are physically changing that. And that's very kind of, well, I suppose that's one of the least manufacturing centric examples we could go ahead and have of process. But also, change management is, hey, I am currently in X position. I would like to get to Y position. How do I go ahead and manage upward and put myself in the correct position and acquire the appropriate certificates and experience and visibility in order to be able to go ahead and successfully move into that next position? And I think it's interesting because it is. I feel, as we said, I think it was when we had Logan on. I feel like everyone comes to change management as a realization of not everyone within an organization has only altruistic feelings, right? Like, everyone has a motive, and you have to understand those motives. And then once you understand those motives, you can look to go pull the levers within those motives so that those people can be happy as you go through the process of this change, be it internally or externally.
Mhm. Yeah, and look, I mean, a lot goes into change management. I think that there must be, I would assume, a document, or at least some kind of a, I would assume, book where a lot of these concepts have already been delineated and perhaps outlined. I have not received any formal training in change management, right? A lot of it has been
Mhm.
trial by fire, for better or worse, and I think that I can speak from experience rather than perhaps a specific certificate. But I would assume that there are professionals that deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And to be honest with you, I have reflected, and I guess as I've gone through my career, in the sense that I think that it is much harder to make some of these projects succeed as a result of change management than it is on the technical side, right? So the
Yeah.
technical feasibility is very often understood, but the human factor makes it extremely difficult and, to an extent, I would say unpredictable, right? Until you've gained that experience as to how successful or how poorly, I suppose, some of these initiatives will transpire. And I guess,
Absolutely.
let me go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I completely agree with you. I guess the quote unquote professionals in this would be your consultants, would be sometimes your operational consultants. I've done a not insignificant amount of work in that area, both intentionally and unintentionally. And to your point, Vlad, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like being able to have the technical feasibility study, like you and I could go look at most lines, and if they're like, hey, we need to go increase the throughput by 20%, we could say, yes, it's feasible. It's not feasible by running some simple math calculations. And then at that point, you can go implement a series of changes, physical, mechanical, and otherwise, in the line in order to physically allow it to run 20% faster. The actions that we need the operational staff to take in order to allow us to run 20% faster is a completely different issue, right? Is a completely different series of levers that we must run to attempt to be successful on. And to your point, I agree. Like that is where the majority of these projects fail. The majority of technically competent engineers could go through the process of building what would be a successful project. But if we only do the mechanicals and don't understand the operations and don't understand the other parts, we are bound for failure. I think Logan had a really good example when he was on talking about a project that he had done in which they delivered a solution and they showed up 2 or 3 months later and everything was shut off because someone bumped a couple of sensors, and it was physically easier to go ahead and just shut off the entire system and count the things manually than it was to try to get someone to go readjust the sensors or something to that effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as we maybe transition to the next bullet point, right, I think we can unpack this a little bit better because ultimately we've both navigated some of these changes. We have some learnings to share. But like any other story, I think there's ultimately beginning. I would say we're in the middle part, right? Because we're still learning, we're still experiencing some of these projects. So there's no perhaps end, but there's certainly a lot of stories to share. So let me start maybe with the beginning for me, right? So and again, a lot of this is open information. You can go on my profile. Started my early career with Procter and Gamble, right? And so for some context, Procter and Gamble has an internal system which is basically their own proprietary Lean Six Sigma, if you will, that is called IWS, right? Integrated Work Systems. And so depending on which side you visit, from Procter and Gamble, they will have different readiness stages, right? Anywhere from 1 all the way up to 4. I got hired on to a site which basically qualified for the highest rating in North America right before I joined, right? So to paint you again a picture, all of the operational excellence tools were already in place, right? So anything from how meetings are conducted to how engineering projects are rolled out to, again, plant floor data, how it is being passed. And so a lot of the tools, when I joined, I had to learn them, but again, in the context of them being already, how would I say, they've already gone through the process of implementing said tools. And so early in my career, I learned to understand the tools, but I hadn't necessarily gained the appreciation of what it takes to deploy a lot of those tools, right? So when I go to any manufacturer, I immediately, to an extent, can spot the differences, right? Because I come from, I would say, or at least have experienced a place where it has already implemented all those tools and saw the benefits. I see a lot of manufacturers that don't have a proper RCA or root cause analysis tool. I see a lot of misses when it comes to how data is presented. And again, I can throw a lot of acronyms at our listeners at this point, but ultimately, like I said, I had the opportunity, and I would say just was extremely lucky to have seen a lot of those tools as they were already implemented early in my career, so that a lot of the subsequent exercises was trying to deliver them successfully in these facilities. But I wanted maybe to get your side before we get into early memories as well as successes and our failures.
I I think that's really interesting, Vlad. And every time you've told the story, I thought that's really interesting because as I look back, like if we put the Dave hat on, going to work for one of like P&G, and we've got these ratings, instead of you being like, I worked for the facility that was the highest rated in North America, for Dave, it would be like, I went to work at a facility that qualified as one only because you were unable to score lower than one on the majority of these.
You could
On the
get a
majority.
zero. You could get a
Okay,
zero. So there were
and yes, of a rating of 1 to 4, I would have gone to work for a facility that was a solid zero in the past. And so I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of my perspective is based upon the fact that early on, I was gifted the opportunity, in part forcibly, to understand and go about figuring out the different personal parts within change management because that's what was needed in order to go ahead and get the job done.
Mhm.
I so I worked for a couple of groups kind of early in my career and got hired on to a couple of different places. The specific name of the group is insignificant because of the story I'm about to tell. And so generally good groups, generally good people, but very, what's the best way to say this? Very much this is what we're going to go do, and we don't really care about how other people would go about solving these problems or how other groups would go about solving these problems better, or this is what you need to do, this is your work for the day, you need to do your work for the day. And then beyond that, we don't really care what you do as long as you're still physically sitting here for that. And so there were a couple of times in which I was frustrated because I was looking for growth, right? Like I was looking for more to do and I was looking for growth. And sometimes we're happy that everything is calm, and other times the lack of action over the course of the day is the most mind-numbing, insane part that anyone could go ahead and work. And so as I was going, right, and so like you put on that engineering cap and you're like, let me go and articulate, these are the things that I've done, and I basically go through the process of asking for more. And I had a really interesting conversation with my dad, and it kind of reset that perspective, and it kind of resets a lot of the perspectives when I go and have conversations with people, reuser stories and everything else. But as we start projects, right, it was basically the question of what's in it for them, right? So you're looking to do more, you're looking to make a change of a position, or you're looking to do this, and these are your metrics, and that's great, but so what? Like what is the tangible value that the person as the manager or the company and the organization is going to receive by allowing you to do that? And that could be like going to a conference for a certificate, that could go to a training class, that could be taking on other additional responsibilities. So what? Like what does it matter for them? And so that was one of those moments in which I just kind of sat back. And at one point I realized it would like there is no tangible, the only tangible benefit is this group could potentially continue to have me working for them for an extended period of time, because if I am not given these opportunities, I'm going to go look elsewhere, right? And so as I go and look, and so longtime listeners, and Vlad has certainly heard me talk about a lot of the different stories that we're going to talk about here. But as I go and I talk about user stories, and as I talk about pain points, I like to go ask the end users and the operation staff specifically, like, what are the pain points? What things hurt you the most? What things are most frustrating? And sometimes it's as simple as, hey, they're pushing the same 14 buttons over and over again, And as they're pushing the same 14 buttons over and over again, we can go qualify that as truthful and correct and go make a change to go turn it into one button. And by turning it into one button, it helps the operators go reduce the number of button pushes. And sometimes we're able to go increase throughput because of the fact that, they're pushing 145 buttons a day, and that turns into 10 times. And because we get to that, it becomes we can go from 10 to 11 runs over the course of the shift, right? So like I've seen that, but also tangibly, as listeners have heard me talk about user stories, I like to go find the user stories and the pain points, and I like to solve those pain points for the people that have been there the longest, because it allows them to become the internal champions. And it allows me to do, I don't really think of it as change management, but in this, it is change management, right? So it allows me to do the change management of changing the process to help them and to fix their pain points. And then it allows them to go continue the change management. And they also wouldn't use the term change management, but it allows them to continue to go down the change management process of being successful and pushing this out to the rest of their group or the rest of this organization. And if it's their solution, they are not going to go let this solution fail.
Yeah, and look, this is maybe where I would say diverting a little bit to a philosophical discussion. But at the end of the day, and I believe that we've had this conversation on the show in the past, manufacturing as a business, I don't want to say it's not rocket science, but ultimately it comes down as a competitive marketplace on which you are producing a specific product, and the overall business needs to be able to produce that product cheaper and I would say better than anybody else, right? And obviously we can discuss some of the branding as to some of the nuances as to the branding or maybe the quality or commodities, right? And I think that's a whole other like very long conversation. But I think as the organization, if we don't have a mutual understanding that all of us are better together than on our own, then it's very difficult to impact change, right? And maybe for the operator that's just pushing a sequence of buttons, he doesn't necessarily care that the product is, how would I say it, is becoming better as a result of him having to do a little bit more work because of some of the changes that we're making. But he needs to, I would say, suffer maybe those consequences in the short term so that the company could have a better standing in the long run. It's a tough conversation, right? Like where this needs to turn. So I think that in the changes that I have seen, there's not necessarily everyone that has benefited, and there was a, how would I say it, a necessarily an understanding that we all need to become better, but it's more of the organization as a whole becomes better as a result of these changes, although they might be painful in the short term or for a specific group of individuals, right? But anyways, that's, again, I think there's a lot there to unpack, right? Maybe to continue on and piggyback on your story, right? So for me, the big realization going from an IWS rated 4 site to an IWS rated 0 site, when it's also important to mention, and again, this is also public information, I went to work from P&G into Kraft Heinz, and the reason why it's important to mention is because Kraft Heinz has purchased the IWS tools specifically from Procter Gamble, right? And so did other groups. Ernst & Young is notorious for implementing same principles. Now, the problem for those who are listening and those that haven't been exposed to those tools specifically is that a lot of the tools are just that, right? They are basically tools that what can go on, I would say now LLMs, but ultimately on Google, and find what is root cause analysis, what is, how do you conduct maybe daily direction setting, like shift pass down meetings. And you can find a breakdown of basically steps that you can follow. The problem is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that once they are in place and they are running, it is almost as if everyone understands the benefits at that stage. It is very different to not have those tools in place and to try instill them into different people, different groups, and to get through that, I would say, very difficult hump, right, that
Mhm.
will be in front of you, that ultimately results in running worse for a specific period of time, which again depends on the company, on the change, that will then allow the company to be better, right? And I like to use the root cause analysis tools because I've certainly used them quite frequently. But to paint a maybe better picture for the listeners, when I was at P&G, right, I was on the engineering team. And basically, when there was any failure, right, it could be from the process, it could be from the materials, it could be, again, like technical, it could be um, anything, the operator would be the first line of defense, right? So they would go and inspect the machine. It could be a piece of material got stuck in, in a belt. They need to remove it, reset it. But the point I'm trying to make here is that they would create a report which is called the RCA, root cause analysis, right? And they would write out, well, the machine failed for this reason. And there's different flavors, right? I'm just trying to keep it short. They will write
Mhm.
out the machine of this specific line failed for this reason. We have eliminated the failure by removing, the piece of material. They will then write out that there's no further action to be done, and they would log it into the system. And of course, the only way that would escalate to the engineering team is that it would go through the operator. Then it would usually involve a mechanic or electrician. It would
Mhm.
then involve an operations based engineer, right? So every line had an engineer from the operations team assigned to it. And then if they couldn't figure it out, they would then call the engineering department, right? So basically, multiple people would have touched the documentation and have created a lot of materials and resources for me to then look at the sheet and understand, well, this machine, this specific failure, this is what we've observed. We see this on the HMI. We see this in the SCADA system. We've done A, B, C, D. This is why we got stuck, and this is where the engineering team gets involved. In other facilities, right, like namely the one that I have joined after P&G, there was no such process, right? So it could
Mhm.
be calling the technician, then calling the engineering or the maintenance team, and then whoever shows up, they do their best to troubleshoot. They never log any documentation. And so, again,
Mhm.
as you discuss this, we all agree that there should be a better process, right?
Mhm.
But telling people that from one day to the next, instead of just basically keeping all of that information in your head, you now need to write it down. You need to make sure that it gets passed on. You need to make sure that it gets logged, is a very difficult change
Yeah.
management problem, right? The tools are
Oh,
all there.
absolutely.
Yeah, the technology is all there. It's just that getting people aligned on who's going to receive the documents, who you're going to call when there is a
Mhm.
failure you can't troubleshoot, who you're going to train on different scenarios of failure, right? So again, it was very revealing for me to see the title, let's say, of operator is vastly different between companies, right? Some
Mhm.
operators will perform minor mechanical and even electrical repairs, while in other companies, they're just pushing in raw material onto the line
Mhm.
and they pretty much call anybody else as soon as there is a failure. So, anyways, that was my kind of like early, maybe I would say like memory when it comes to impacting change management, but also having a really hard time when it comes to succeeding. But I'll continue that story. I guess I was curious, Dave, what were some of those thoughts on that side, but also your experiences?
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. So the change management of we're changing everything about an organization, which is delivering one of these types of solutions to an organization, is very difficult. It is very time intensive. It is exceptionally disruptive. And that is one of those. It becomes difficult. There needs to be some incentive for many of these people to go live through the change, right? You're going to lose a not insignificant amount of the staff as you go through these wholesale changes, and as you make the job more difficult. As you make the job more difficult, there needs to be some incentive to, typically a tangible incentive. Typically, you need to pay people money, right? Like, we need to be successful with this. And when you're successful, we will go and there will be bonuses or raises or something along those lines. And that, in my experience, is typically what one has to do in order to be successful. I think that has become more and more prevalent. Certainly in the last 5 to 10 years. There are some organizations that I work with, and Vlad, you've certainly heard me tell the stories of you go around and you're introducing each other, and they're like, "Hi, I'm Dave. I've been at this company for 25 years." And you'd be like, "Hi, I'm Vlad. I've been at this company for 45 years." And, in some of these round robins, it was not uncommon that the person who's been there only 15 years was the person who had been there the shortest amount of time of all of these people in these conversations. When you have those people, and when there are pensions and other things like that involved, there is typically the need and desire for them to help make the company and organization better so that they can continue to grow with the company and organization. When you have a bunch of hourly workers that are just kind of coming in and circulating every 6 to 12 weeks, if the company, down the street starts offering an extra dollar an hour for operators, they're going to go leave and go take the dollar an hour for operators. So I guess I bring that up because in my experience, as you're going through these wholesale changes, it becomes one, important to properly incentivize the people to go through it, and two, realize the just like pain that the entire facility is going to go through as you're going through this, right? If our current throughput is 10 widgets per hour, do not expect to go make 10 widgets per hour and go through this wholesale change. Realize that it's going to drop 20, 30%, maybe more for some extended period of time because of all of the steps that's going to take place, of all of the training and retraining that is going to take place. Going through that process, as I said, it's a really difficult process. It's one of those that typically come from the very top of the organization, which is good because you need people from the top of the organization to be bought in. But the difficulty that a group goes through and the amount of turnover that you see, sometimes the turnover is necessary in order to get to the other end, in which you have a fresh enough amount of people who are like, okay, this is the new normal, right? We don't necessarily remember the old stuff. This is the new normal. This is the job. Let's build from here and go forward.
Yeah, and look, a couple of thoughts on what you're saying, right? So, number one, proper incentives, right? So,
Mhm.
I learned that lesson with the rollout of RCAs, right? And so, again, at P&G, it was the expectation that every single incident needed to have a report, right? And if you were not to submit a report, I would say for any downtime that was at least 10 minutes, there would be questions, right? Like
Mhm.
asked usually in daily meetings. Now, on the other plant side, where the plant ultimately had purchased the tools and was looking to implement similar tools, and I was advocating again for RCAs and for reasons I can obviously expand on, but ultimately, I think it saves a lot of time and it makes the organization better. And we can chat about the different transitions that the companies need to undergo in order to reach some of those levels, but ultimately, I would say it is a foundational element of a operational organization. But anyways, going back to the incentives, right? And so the incentive immediately was you have been trained on how to conduct an RCA. How well or how poorly that was done, right? Obviously, is to be debated and discussed. But ultimately, people were given the paperwork on how to do the 5 whys, right? And again, if
Mhm.
you're familiar with the tools, it's either 5 whys, the fishbone, 6W2H, and I believe there's a few other like different flavors. But it's trying to understand the problem and basically provide more details as to why it happened. Well, the incentive was whoever submits the most RCAs at the end of the week, we're going to give them a $50 gift card. And you can
Uh-huh.
probably imagine what happened, right? So ultimately, again, people started submitting RCAs for all sorts of different purposes without any substance. What they truly fail to understand, and this only happens as you go through the process enough times, is that the paperwork itself is not the end result of the RCA. What you're looking for is improvement of the actual capability to solve some of those issues, right? The impact of an RCA is not the number of documents you have submitted, but it is the improvement of the overall, I would say, organization, the ability to resolve those problems, escalate them to the right channels, and ultimately reduce the downtime, either, again, like the line, the process, or what have you, is going to incur, right? And so by placing the incentive incorrectly, and I had this same kind of conversation with the operations manager that wanted to go that route. We basically, again, did not progress in the right direction, right? Like I said, I would just get a stack of papers at the end of the day or at the end of the week. And of course, none of them actually helped anyone solve some of those problems and or improve.
I think that's a really good example of well-intentioned but just completely off the mark. I've certainly seen similar things. So one of the successes that I like to talk about within change management is the connected workforce example that listeners have certainly heard me talk about several times. This, in fact, started as kind of a change management program in which we went through several different iterations of the project, but then it basically came down to we struggle to articulate the problem in a problem statement that would allow that our operators can go tell to our maintenance staff, our engineering staff, etc., to then be able to go fix the problem in the fastest, best ways possible. So how do we go down the path of teaching people to create a better problem statement? And that was like the third iteration of it, which transitioned into a connected workforce application, which they were using in a different part of the facility, which, as longtime listeners have heard me say, basically Facebook from 2010 or so. And so people were able to go take that, and people were able to go share and talk, et cetera, et cetera. And so I bring that up because one of the incentives was, in fact, who can post the most, right? And it wasn't a full-on incentive. It was one of those that got floated. And the comment was very similar to yours, Vlad, right? Of, if we just want people to post the most, we're going to get very low quality posts, and we're going to get them in a huge volume, and it's going to wash out everything else. We did, in fact, get some just wild posts, which were really good, and like they found leaks and other things that no one, a couple of times we were there, we're like, where is this part of the facility, and how are we leaking this much glycol, right? And things along those lines. And so we did find some very positive things. Again, I think it has to go. I think the best incentives go and solve problems. And so when I tell this story, I think I told it earlier in the theme about Joe. I use the name Joe because that's his name, right? Shows up 40 minutes late to a 60-minute meeting, immediately interrupts things, asks questions along the lines of, hey, we've gone down these change managements from TPM to Lean Six Sigma to Six Sigma to all of these, like every 18 months or 2 years for the last 20 years. They've gone and attempted to implement these things, right? And so there was the question of, what does tangible change look like? Oh, well, one of Joe's major pain points, and Joe is very resonant about this up until we got to this, but like one of Joe's major pain points is he was one of those guys that had stopped counting after having been there for 35 years. And he ran one of the groups. He was the lead operator for one of these groups. And his main pain point was, quote, all these kids come in and he trains them and they just want to scroll on their phone, and then they're gone 6 or 8 weeks later because the group down the street starts paying an extra $1 an hour, and they leave because there's no incentive for them to stay. So what we did is we set Joe up with the ability to, and we worked with him in order to go down and build that training material into, he says it once, right? We've got it on video, and we upload the documents that exist. And then we were able to go print QR codes and attach documents and machine and other items to those QR codes. And so, like, if you're up a ladder and you forgot the manual, as opposed to having to go climb down the ladder to go get the manual or go call Joe and ask him the question, gets upset at you, QR code up there, and these are the instructions to go do the normal 80% of the job. And that was the moment. That was the moment, Vlad, in which he went from the why would I ever download this to my phone to, okay, someone help me go find this app because I'm going to go log in right now. And so it is it is one of those things that it's important to find the pain points as much as possible for the people and longtime employees who are working there, and turn that into incentives, right? Like if we can make people's jobs easier, sometimes that is what is needed.
I'm thinking of a couple of ideas, right? For some reason, I was hoping that you would tell that story a little bit differently than the last times I've heard it. But, instead of creating the QR code solution, they just turned the manufacturing company into a training facility where they can charge both the applicants, but also the manufacturer down the street for the training that they've done to the personnel. But number two, it is an interesting thought, but I think that QR codes at some point were gaining traction, but it would be really interesting to see that ultimately the OEM that puts on a label on their equipment, whether that's a motor, it could be a drive, it could be a PLC, just put that label with the QR code on the faceplate so that you would basically shortcut that for the end user. And for example, when I look inside of the panel, I can just scan the QR code and it would open the appropriate PDF with the manual, right? I'm not even talking about the specific maybe prints that could be added with a QR code on the side of the panel, but ultimately just the OEM equipment. I am not sure that as to why there's no such easy way, I would say, to look at parts. And I would be even willing to bet that if you had that solution and opportunity to just purchase, let's say, equipment from that same OEM by scanning the QR code, it gets automatically added to your shopping cart, it would actually drive a certain amount of revenue. But that is a general thought.
I like that. I imagine that it turns into a function of additional work, right? Like it would take more work to do it than not to do it. And then if you do it, right? No, but like also if you do it, I imagine there's some amount of function of liability, right? Like the manufacturer is then liable for those live documents as opposed to not doing it and thus removing the liability. Having said that, I love that idea. I love that idea. I think that idea makes a lot of sense. I also don't really know why we struggle so much to go put that information on the plant floor. And I've tried it lots of different ways. I've tried multiple iterations of QR codes, which in my mind are still probably the best. I have tried RealWear, like the monocular style. I've tried the monocular style, mixed reality. I've done mixed reality on tablets and phones and other things along those lines. I played with HoloLenses for a period of time. Who did we have? We had Ron on last week who was wearing like those meta glasses, and I think it was like one of the eyes was a monocular, which that seemed pretty cool. I feel like I would get really distracted. I don't think it would be good for me to be able to then go turn all of that just into a single monocular, but I love the idea. I guess I think at the end of the day, part of the issue is we have so much legacy equipment. And because we have all of this legacy equipment and because it's from so many different manufacturers and groups, it forces us to, what's the word I'm looking for? It forces us to go do that work as a site by site. And in my experience, right, like the groups that do 5S or do Lean Six Sigma or do these things, and they've got their tools in place and they've got their lines painted. They also hopefully either have or are working on having their documentation in similar appropriate orders, be it in QR code or listed by an ISA 95 style asset, etc., to allow people to go get in there quicker. And for those groups that are running the best, I don't know if the tangible benefit of adding QR codes to each of those machines is going to save them any tangible amount of time. I would also wager that the groups who would get the most benefit from that are running so poorly, there are probably 20 other things that they could do to allow themselves to run better. And I'm sure there's a sweet spot. I personally have not found that sweet spot in order to go ahead and exploit as customers, right? And so I could not articulate what that sweet spot is. I can tell you groups who I have found tangible value by having sets of tools at each machine. I can tell you groups like this group who is at the very end and can find a little bit of tangible value, but that's as much as a little bit of operator training, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of maintenance, and everyone finds a little bit of value, but not enough to go do this wholesale across all of our facilities. So I imagine that there's a group of people in there that would find benefit. But to your point, Vlad, I also couldn't tell you why QR codes or other things like that have not caught on nearly as much as one would hope.
Yeah, and look, I guess I will make one comment on that thought, right? I think that in a general sense, but more specifically for manufacturing, right? Most people, I would say, are content to execute the process as is, right? Of course, there's going to be leadership that tries to drive improvement, but I would say it is very difficult to find people that will pick up one of the tools and actually try to, implement it within an organization. And I think that there is a point to be made that sometimes you want the idea or the experience coming from that person to be implemented, and even though maybe with marginal benefit, then to try to find the most optimal or the perfect solution, right? So to your point, there's probably 20 different options that they can pick from a variety of different things, whether that's people, process, or technology, that could be better than QR codes. But if someone is very adamant about, hey, like, we should be able to find manuals in a time of need. And I can tell you, even the largest companies, right, I would still go to the panel or go to their control system or server rack, or again, this could obviously be on the process or mechanical sides as well. And you're then going to go back to your laptop, type in the search bar, here's my part number, to find that manual, right? Again, to your point, maybe it's not worth it for a larger or more mature organization, but I think that the point of Lean Six Sigma and all of these tools is to be flexible enough to let the people drive some of that change, right? And you shouldn't, and I guess this was a very early career, I would say, realization that people with enthusiasm to make changes, very, very difficult to find. And you need to do everything you can at the leadership side to preserve and encourage those initiatives, as opposed to trying to find what is most optimal, right? And again, I say that a little bit open-endedly. There's, of course, some nuances. You can just let people run amok, but it is important to allow them to figure out on their own, or by maybe, again, using something that's a little bit less optimized. Let me maybe tell you a story of my success, right, when it comes to change management. So as I transitioned away from the plant level role, right, so I used to be a maintenance manager for Kraft for not a very long period of time. They went through a lot of different plant closures. Again, that's a long story, but ultimately I went to work for a consultant slash systems integrator that was doing a lot of work for a variety of different food and bev facilities, including many of those from Kraft Heinz, right? And so a lot of my work was around extracting data from plant floor equipment and then presenting that inside of, I would say, a little bit of SCADA, but mostly MES type of solutions, right? And it could be anything from tracking schedules to work orders to recipes, but fundamentally, a lot of that data was coming from the PLCs. It was funneled, again, through SCADA or Historian into an MES on a server. And what I very quickly realized going to different facilities is that I could almost immediately tell how successful they will be at change management based on my very early conversations, right? And to paint a more explicit picture, right? Like, well, Vlad, what does that actually mean? I would show up to a facility, right, and I would explain to them and demo basically the tool that we had built and what was possible with the tool for different organizations. And
Mm-hmm.
you could immediately sense either an excitement, right? So those that understood data and did not have enough data, specifically continuous improvement teams, plant management teams, were extremely excited. And conversely, people that may need to put in more work, or people that didn't truly understand data, or people that needed to adjust to some of the changes, were very resistant, right? So you would find teams that would say, well, you know what, we already have a whiteboard at the end of the line, we're tracking the packages, we don't care about none of these solutions. I could immediately tell how difficult the project was going to be with that specific facility, right? And again, to expand on that a little bit, and I think it's very topical for change management, again, people want a different solution that is tailored to their specific function, right? So an operator looking at line data, for example, is only concerned, or again, I use only concerned or primarily concerned with how the line is running during their shift. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason as to why is because a lot of their KPIs and performance metrics are tied to the results at the end of that specific shift, right? So they come in a couple of shifts a week. Obviously, it depends on the business and facility. They're only looking for that shift. If you
Mm-hmm.
then look at the manager or supervisor in the production area, they're trying to staff people. They're trying to understand which lines
Mm-hmm.
are performing better. They're trying to get the schedule for production under control. They're trying to understand the losses of their batches. So they're looking at, typically, and again, I use that as a generality, they're looking at shift performance, they're looking at weekly performance, they're maybe looking sometimes at a couple of months, maybe quarterly, right? They're trying to understand how we're doing. If you go the next level above, right, those are going to be your directors and VPs of operations. They're concerned with a completely different scenario, right? And you know this very well. They're looking at numbers in terms of dollar amounts. They're looking at how the production schedule has been running, because they're also working with the sales departments that are, and again, obviously it depends on the business, it depends on the company, but ultimately they're talking to other departments, they're trying to schedule production, they're benchmarking different factories that make the same product against each other. There's a lot of things that lie in those numbers. So again, in my experience, I was very, how would I say it, surprised that a lot of the solutions that I usually get excited by would obviously not resonate with some of the different groups. So I had to almost tailor the pitch to make them understand the possibility of data, but also the nuances that they would need to navigate to some of those gains. And so for me, the biggest success, again, is going into a facility where they were highly skeptical. They maybe understood the basics of the initial demo, but then with the weeks, the months that it took to implement, I could basically showcase within their specific facility and their specific use cases the benefits. And the success for me was looking back 6 months after the deployment,
Mm-hmm.
they were still using the tools, they were asking questions, they were reaching out, they were trying to understand it. Again, the software is relatively complex, right? Like, as I've explained it in a couple of sentences, but ultimately a lot goes into these types of applications and solutions that people use on the daily basis.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a good point that change management success starts at the top, right? You can't go bring in an outside group, be it a Vlad or a McKinsey, and say, make it happen, right? If the,
Well, you could, but yes, it would be difficult.
but
Vlad, not
there's no
McKinsey. You could
there's no impotence, right? Like if the executives over here are like, yeah, these are these dudes who are paying a lot of money to go make this thing work, but like it's on them and we don't care and we are not going to incentivize and we are not going to connect and discuss downward the importance of this, and we are actively going to go blow off these meetings and do these other things, they're going to spend a lot of money and they're not going to be successful
Of
nearly
course.
100% of the time, right? So success certainly starts from the top. If you don't have an engaged leadership, be it leadership at the facility, to your point, Vlad, or leadership at the top of the company for smaller organizations who are actively out there being part of this, then nothing will come from it other than spending a lot of time and money and effort in order to not go and get anywhere. I think that was a very good story. We are running close to time. I think I'd like to go through and maybe talk about a couple of tangible things. Maybe a couple of specific tangible things. Do you have a couple off the top of your head, or would you like me to go first?
I'll let you go first as I ponder them.
Perfect. So, when I think of change management, a couple of things that come to mind that are most important. One, as I just said, change starts from the top, right? If you are the top of an organization, be it at a facility or an organization, you need to outwardly go ahead and display that this change, whatever change it is important to the organization, and we need to go do it, and you need to go be a part of it, because operation and operational staff are looking towards leadership to know how important this is. And then I would say, secondly, regardless of where you are from early on in your career to going outside of your career, selling into or working with different sides, or even later in the career, you have to go and ask the question, what is in it for the person whom I'm asking to change, right? And the more personal you can go make it to them, and as Vlad has heard me say, sometimes personal is about money, right? Like sometimes they're willing to go do this, but they want to make more money. Sometimes it's an ego thing. Sometimes you need to go share and extrapolate how this will go bring value or reduce work or increase visibility, or go pick whichever lever this person is most interested in order to be successful in going down the path of change management, and going in and saying, hey, we should do this for X, Y, and Z reasons, or this is what I'm going to go get out of these things, is a much more difficult sell than saying, hey, I think we should do this. This is going to be the outcome, and I believe this is going to help you for X, or you're going to get X out of this. And being able to go look at it from all perspectives is significantly valuable for the organizations.
Yeah, I would say, maybe to add to your thought as well, like for me, the biggest, I would say, not necessarily takeaway, but maybe a learning point in general, is that change management is a habit that needs to be formed over a certain period of time. Again, like how long it's going to take, it obviously depends on the organization. But my biggest learning point is that it needs to start small, right? And of course, when I say small, right, is I think that we generally fail even as individuals, not just as organizations, because we typically go through the end of the year and we write down some of the changes we would like to make as New Year resolutions. And in a lot of the cases, they are too large, right? And the same happens. I've seen this at companies time and time again. We have failed at a specific project. We're going to take on less, or we're going to figure out a different path. They bring in new management that is, of course, ambitious and wants to prove themselves, and they once again go through the same cycle. So for me, it's, if you're looking to go down the path of improving some of the change management practices in your business, manufacturing or otherwise, start small. Understand what people are willing to make concessions on versus maybe where they are a little bit less flexible, and then grow from there, right? Instead of trying to go from one project where none of it was handled properly to, hey, we're going to implement these very rigid, very structured processes. Again, the largest companies will publicize a lot of those I would say, like, approaches, right, if you will, or best practices that have worked for them. But then you compare a small manufacturer to a massive, multinational, and you start thinking that that's where you need to be. It becomes a big challenge for many. So I would say, for me, start small is definitely the biggest takeaway, or I would say lesson, for the general public?
I love it, Vlad. Thank you so much for that. Listeners, guys, I hope you enjoyed change management from the Dave and Vlad perspective. I hope you enjoyed change management on Manufacturing Hub. If you guys have thoughts, questions, comments, want solicited advice as opposed to just our normal unsolicited advice, please feel free to go ahead and send either Vlad or I a message. Happy to go ahead and give you guys feedback. If you guys are not currently connected with Vlad or I or following Manufacturing Hub, please do so you can make sure to catch the next couple of weeks. Again, we've got Chuck Ridgway from Horner Automation and Chris Stevens and Anne-Marie Brew from Siemens next week, June 3rd, and then the following week, June 10th, as part of our run-up coverage to A3's Automate. If you guys have made it this far on YouTube or podcast format, you're absolutely awesome. Please feel free to go do all of those. Like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, follow along. I'm going to remember to keep asking you guys. And Vlad is going to go remember to post the podcasts on Thursdays. You guys can go ahead and listen to them and continue to participate in this. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.